My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 25 years old. And until 3 weeks ago, I believed my life was built on solid ground. I thought I knew who I was, where I came from, and why certain things about my family never quite added up. The birthday. Parties that felt forced. The way my parents exchanged glances when I asked about baby photos. The relatives who seemed to know me better than I knew them. For 15 years, I accepted these oddities as quirks of a close-knit family. I was wrong. The revelation began with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. I was rushing to catch the subway to work when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. The voice on the other end was shaky, elderly, and unfamiliar. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" the woman asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Eleanor Hartwell. I believe you're my granddaughter." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stopped walking, causing other commuters to bump into me as they rushed past. My grandmother had died. When I was 10, I remembered the funeral, the tears, the way my mother couldn't stop crying for weeks afterward. "I think you have the wrong number," I managed to say, my voice barely audible over the street noise. "Sarah, sweetheart, I know this is confusing. Your parents told you I was dead, didn't they? They had to. It was the only way to protect you from what happened 15 years ago." My legs felt weak. I found myself leaning against a building, trying to process what I was hearing. This woman knew things about me, about my family, that a stranger shouldn't know. She mentioned my childhood scar from falling off my bike, the way I used to collect seashells during our family vacations, details that only someone close could know. "I don't understand," I whispered into the phone. "Meet me today, Sarah. There's so much you need to know about who you really are, about what your family sacrificed to keep you safe. The coffee shop on Maple Street, the one with the blue awning. 2 o'clock, I'll be wearing a red scarf." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, staring at my phone. People continued to rush past me, living their normal lives while mine had just been turned upside down. I called in sick to work, something I had never done without actually being ill. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of anxiety and confusion. At 1:45, I found myself standing outside the coffee shop she had mentioned. Through the window, I could see an elderly woman sitting alone at a corner table, a red scarf draped over her shoulders. She had my mother's eyes, the same deep brown that I saw in the mirror every morning. My hands trembled as I pushed open the door. Eleanor looked up as I approached, and I saw tears immediately form in her eyes. She stood slowly, her hands reaching toward me as if she wanted to embrace me, but wasn't sure if she should. The resemblance was undeniable now that I was close enough to see her properly. She had the same nose as my mother, the same slight dimple in her chin that I had inherited. "You look exactly like your mother did at your age," she said softly, her voice breaking with emotion. I sat down across from her, my mind racing with questions I didn't know how to ask. She ordered us both coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she lifted the cup to her lips. "Your parents aren't bad people, Sarah. I need you to understand that before I tell you everything. They made an impossible choice 15 years ago, and they've lived with the weight of that decision every day since." "What choice?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, despite the chaos in my head. Eleanor took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what came next. 15 years ago, your family was involved in something that put all of your lives in danger. Your father witnessed something he shouldn't have. Something involving very powerful people who don't hesitate to eliminate threats. When they realized he could identify them, they came after your entire family. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. I loosened my scarf and tried to focus on her words, but they seemed to be coming from very far away. "Your parents had two choices," she continued. "They could run all of them and spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. Or they could make it appear as if the biggest threat to these people was eliminated. The biggest threat was me. I don't understand. Why you?" "Because I was the one who convinced your father to go to the authorities in the first place. I was the one who insisted he'd do the right thing, even when it became clear how dangerous it would be. When these people started asking questions, when they started getting close to finding us, your parents realized that as long as I was alive, you would never be safe. I felt like I was drowning. The conversations around us became white noise, and all I could focus on was the sound of my own heartbeat. So they faked your death, I said, the pieces starting to come together in my mind. She nodded, tears flowing freely now. It was the only way. I had to disappear completely, had to become someone else. If your parents held a funeral, they grieved publicly. They made everyone believe I was gone. For 15 years, I've lived under a different name in a different state, watching my family from a distance while pretending to be dead. The weight of what she was telling me settled over me like a heavy blanket. I thought about all the times I had visited my grandmother's grave, all the flowers I had left, all the conversations I had with a headstone that marked an empty plot. The grave, I said quietly. Empty, Eleanor confirmed. Your parents couldn't bear to put a stranger there, so they left it empty and told everyone my body had been cremated. They thought it would be easier for you to have a place to visit, to grieve. I remembered being 10 years old, standing beside that grave while my parents cried. I remembered my mother's hand on my shoulder, the way she had whispered that Grandma was in a better place now. All of it had been a performance, a necessary lie to keep me safe. Why now? I asked. Why are you telling me this after all these years? Eleanor reached across the table and took my hands in hers. They were warm and soft, exactly as I remembered from childhood. Because they're all dead now, Sarah. The people who threatened us, the ones who made us live this lie. Your father. Kept track of them over the years, and the last one died in prison 2 months ago. We're safe now. We can finally be a family again. The relief in her voice was palpable, but I felt anything but relieved. I felt betrayed, confused, angry at a situation that wasn't really anyone's fault. Does Mom know you're here? I asked. Not. Yet I wanted to talk to you first, to explain everything before I came back into their lives. I wasn't sure how you would react, whether you would want to see me again after everything that happened. I stared at her, this woman who was both a stranger and my grandmother, trying to reconcile the person sitting across from me with the woman I had mourned for 15 years. Part of me wanted to be angry, to storm out and demand answers from my parents, but a larger part of me understood the impossible position they had been in. Tell me about the 15 years, I said finally. What was your life like? Eleanor's face softened, and I could see the loneliness that had marked her years of exile. I lived in a small town in Oregon under the name Catherine Miller. I worked at a library, kept to myself mostly. I had a small apartment with a garden where I grew the same flowers your grandfather used to love. Every night I would call a number your father gave me, just to hear his voice on the answering machine. He never knew I was calling. The image of my grandmother, alone in a strange place, calling just to hear my father's voice, broke something. Inside me, I started crying right there in the coffee shop, ugly tears that I couldn't control. Eleanor reached across and held me while I sobbed, her own tears mixing with mine. I followed your life from a distance, she continued, when I had composed myself slightly. Your father would leave coded messages for me in online forums. I knew when you graduated high school, when you got your first job, when you moved into your own apartment. I have a scrapbook at home filled with newspaper clippings of your achievements, photos your father posted online that he knew I would find. The thought of my father secretly maintaining contact with his supposedly dead mother-in-law, creating a way for her to stay connected to our family without compromising our safety, made me understand the depth of sacrifice they had all made. I know this is overwhelming, Eleanor said, squeezing my hands. I know you need time to process everything. But Sarah, I want you to know that not a day went by that I didn't think about you. When you were little, you used to call me Nana L. You would sit in my lap and make me tell you stories about magical kingdoms where families were never separated and love always won in the end. I did remember that vaguely. I remembered feeling safe in someone's lap, listening to stories that seemed more real than fairy tales. I had always assumed those memories were of my mother, but now I realized they were of my grandmother. This woman who had been erased from my life to keep me safe. What happens now? I asked. That's up to you, she said. I would love nothing more than to be part of your life again, to meet you properly as the woman you've become. But I understand if this is too much, if you need time, or if you decide you can't forgive what we did. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just my grandmother, but a woman who had sacrificed everything for her family. She had given up her identity, her relationships, her entire life, so that I could grow up safe and normal. The anger I had felt earlier began to transform into something else. Something that felt like gratitude mixed with profound sadness for all the time we had lost. I want to understand everything, I said finally. I want to know what my father witnessed, who these people were, why our lives had to be torn apart. And I want to know about you, about who you are now, about the person you became during those 15 years. Eleanor smiled for the first time since I had sat down, and it was like watching the sun come out from behind clouds. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. I hoped you might say that, she said, sliding the envelope across the table. Everything is in here. Police reports, newspaper articles, photos, even some of the coded messages your father sent me over the years. I've been carrying this with me for months, waiting for the right time to share it with you. I opened the envelope carefully, as if it might explode. The first thing I saw was a photograph of my father from 15 years ago. Looking younger, but with the same worried expression I had seen him wear throughout my childhood. Underneath the photo was a police report dated March 15th, exactly 15 years ago. As I read, the full scope of what my family had endured began to emerge. My father had been working as an accountant for a construction company that was involved in a money laundering operation for a criminal organization. He discovered discrepancies in the books, and after consulting with Eleanor, I decided to report it to the FBI. What he hadn't realized was that the organization had connections within law enforcement. Someone had tipped them off about his cooperation, and within days, they knew exactly who had exposed them. The report detailed threats made against our family, attempts to intimidate my father into recanting his testimony, and finally, a direct threat against me. They said they would make you disappear, Eleanor said quietly as I read. They said your parents would never find your body, and that they would make sure your father understood that his cooperation had cost him his daughter. My hands were shaking as I continued reading. The next document was a letter from the FBI explaining that they could offer my family witness protection, but that it would require us to leave our entire lives behind. My parents had refused, according to the notes, because they couldn't bear to uproot me from my school and friends. So you volunteered to disappear instead, I said, looking up at Eleanor. It wasn't really volunteering, she replied. It was the only solution that made sense. I was retired. I didn't have young children depending on me for stability. Your parents needed to stay to maintain their jobs and keep you in school. If I disappeared, if these people believed I was dead, the immediate threat to you would be eliminated. The next document explained how they had staged her death. A car accident on a rainy night, a body burned beyond recognition that was actually a Jane Doe from the morgue. Dental records that had been switched by a sympathetic medical examiner who understood the circumstances. The level of planning and coordination required was staggering. How many people knew? I asked. 7 people total. Your parents, me, 2 FBI agents, the medical examiner, and 1 police detective. Everyone else, including you, had to believe it was real for the deception to work. Asterisk, I continued reading through the documents. each one revealing another layer of the elaborate deception that had shaped my entire adolescence. There were bills for the funeral service, carefully crafted obituaries that had run in local newspapers, even condolence cards from family, friends who had genuinely believed Eleanor was dead. Your mother almost broke down several times, Eleanor continued as I read. There were nights when she would call me, sobbing, saying she couldn't keep lying to you. But we all knew that one slip, one moment of weakness could put you back in danger. I found a series of coded messages that my father had posted on an obscure gardening forum. Updates about my life disguised as discussions about plant care. Sarah's roses are blooming beautifully this spring had been posted the day I graduated high school. The young oak tree is growing stronger every season. Was from my 20th birthday. Eleanor had responded to each message with her own coded replies, letting my father know she was safe and grateful for the updates. The digital breadcrumbs of a family maintaining connection across an impossible divide were heartbreaking to read. I kept everything, she said, pulling out a tablet and showing me a folder filled with screenshots. Every photo your father posted. On social media, that included you. Every school newsletter that mentioned your achievements. Every local news article about your activities. I created entire photo albums of a life I wasn't allowed to be part of. She scrolled through years of images, my life documented from afar by a woman who had sacrificed everything to keep me safe. Kai prom photos, college graduation, first apartment, all preserved by someone who had loved me from a distance while pretending not to exist. The hardest part, she said, her voice barely audible, was your 21st birthday. Your father posted a photo of you blowing out candles, and I could see in your eyes that you were thinking about me. You had that same expression you used to get as a little girl when you missed me after I'd gone home from visits. I remembered that birthday. I had felt inexplicably sad despite the celebration, as if someone important was missing. I had attributed it to general melancholy about getting older. But now I realized my subconscious had been mourning the grandmother who should have been there. I wrote you letters, Eleanor continued, reaching into her purse again. Hundreds of them every birthday, every Christmas, every major milestone. I never sent them, obviously, but I wrote them anyway. I needed to talk to you somehow, even if you couldn't hear me. She handed me another envelope thicker than the first. These are just from the last 5 years. I have boxes more at home. The weight of the letter-filled envelope felt like holding years of unexpressed love. I opened it carefully and pulled out the first letter, dated on my 21st birthday. Eleanor's handwriting was elegant but shaky with emotion. My dearest Sarah, it began. Today you turn 21. And I am sitting in a small cafe in Oregon, 3,000 miles away from you. Wishing I could be there to see you blow out your candles. Your father's coded message told me you're majoring in psychology now, that you want to help people who have experienced trauma. I'm so proud of the woman you're becoming, even though I can only watch from the shadows. I had to stop reading. The rawness of her words, the love contained in letters that were never meant to be read, overwhelmed me. I looked up at Eleanor, who was watching me with an expression of hope mixed with fear. You don't have to read them all now, she said gently. I just wanted you to know that even though I wasn't there, I was thinking about you constantly. Folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She nodded, bracing herself. Do you resent my parents for the choice that was made? Do you blame them for the 15 years you lost? She was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. I would be lying if I said there weren't moments of anger, moments when I felt like they could have found another way. But Sarah, when I think about you growing up safe and happy, when I see the person you've become, I know we made the right choice. Your parents gave up having a grandmother for their daughter, and I gave up watching my granddaughter grow up. But you've got to have a normal childhood, a normal adolescence. You've got to become who you were meant to be without fear or trauma shaping your early years. Her answer revealed the depth of love that had motivated every difficult decision. This wasn't a story of family members choosing sides or sacrificing some for others. It was a story of adults who had absorbed an impossible situation so that a child could remain innocent. "There's something else you need to know," Eleanor continued, her voice becoming more serious. "The danger wasn't just about your father's testimony. After we staged my death, the FBI continued investigating the organization. What they discovered was that these people had been watching our family for months before your father ever came forward. They knew about you, about your school, about your daily routines." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, Dad?" "Been planning to use you as leverage against your father from the beginning. His cooperation just accelerated their timeline. Even if he had never gone to the authorities, they would have eventually approached him about the money he had discovered. And they would have used threats against you to keep him quiet. The revelation that I had been in danger, regardless of my father's choices, added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. I realized that my entire family had been trapped in circumstances beyond their control, and that the solution they had chosen was truly the only viable option." "How do you know all this?" I asked. "The FBI agent who handled our case stayed in contact with me over the years. Agent Rodriguez became like a friend, updating me whenever there were developments in the case. When the last member of the organization died in prison, she was the one who called to tell me it was finally safe to come home." Eleanor pulled out her phone and showed me a contact labeled Agent Rodriguez. "She wants to meet with you too, to explain the full scope of the investigation and what your family's cooperation ultimately accomplished. The testimony your father provided helped convict 12 people and shut down a money laundering operation that had been running for over 20 years. The magnitude of what my father had sacrificed began to sink in. He hadn't just been a whistleblower. He had been instrumental in bringing down an entire criminal organization. And the price he had paid was living with the secret that his daughter's grandmother was alive, watching his wife grieve a death that hadn't actually occurred, and maintaining a lie that grew heavier with each passing year. "I need to see them," I said suddenly. "I need to see my parents and talk to them about all of this." Eleanor smiled, but I could see concern in her eyes. "Are you ready for that conversation? It's going to be just as overwhelming for them as it has been for you." I thought about my parents, about the subtle ways their behavior had never quite made sense. My mother's tendency to cry whenever she looked through old photo albums. My father's habit of staring off into space with a guilty expression. The way they both seemed to carry a weight that I had never understood. "They've been carrying this secret for 15 years, I said. "They've been living with the knowledge that they separated a mother from her daughter, even though it was the only choice they had. I think they're ready for this conversation too." Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "There's something else, Sarah. Something I haven't told you yet." My heart sank, wondering what other revelations were coming. "Your parents don't know I'm here today. They don't know that the threat is over, that it's safe for me to come back. Agent Rodriguez wanted me to contact them first, but I insisted on talking to you. I needed to know how you would react before I put them through the emotional trauma of seeing me again. So as far as they know, you're still Catherine Miller, living in Oregon." She nodded. "Your father still posts coded messages on that gardening forum. The last one was 3 days ago, telling me about your promotion at work. He has no idea that I'm sitting in a coffee shop with you right now." The thought of my parents continuing their ritual of coded communication, unaware that their sacrifice was no longer necessary, broke my heart in a new way. I imagined my father carefully crafting messages about my life, still protecting a woman he believed had to remain hidden, not knowing she was free to come home. "We need to tell them together," I said. "Tonight. I can't let them spend another day carrying this burden when they don't have to." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears again. "Are you sure you're ready for that? Seeing your parents' reaction too? Learning I'm alive is going to be intense." I thought about it for a moment, trying to imagine the scene. My mother's shock, my father's disbelief, the years of suppressed grief and guilt finally being released. It would be overwhelming for everyone involved, but it was necessary. "I'm ready," I said. "But I want to understand everything first. I want to know about your life as Catherine Miller, about how you survived 15 years of being someone else." Eleanor's expression softened, and I could see both pain and resilience in her features. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done, starting over at 62 with no connections, no history, no family. The FBI helped me establish a new identity, but beyond that, I was on my own." She told me about the small town where she had settled, a place where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions about newcomers. She had rented a tiny apartment above a bookstore and eventually convinced the owner to hire her part-time. "I read everything," she said with a small smile. "Fiction, nonfiction, poetry, philosophy. I read books in languages I didn't understand just to keep my mind occupied." The owner, Mrs. Chen, became the closest thing I had to a friend, though I could never tell her anything real about my past. She described long walks through the Oregon countryside, hours spent in her small garden, and the profound loneliness of living without anyone who truly knew her. She had attended a small church where people were kind but distant, and she had volunteered at a local animal shelter where she could pour her need to nurture into caring for abandoned pets. "The animals were the only ones I could be completely honest with," she said. "I would tell the dogs and cats about my granddaughter, about how proud I was of her accomplishments, about how much I missed being able to hug her. They were excellent." Listeners, I could picture her, this woman who had been forced to erase herself, finding comfort in the unconditional acceptance of rescued animals. The image was both heartbreaking and beautiful. "Did you ever think about breaking your cover? About coming back?" "Every day," she admitted, "especially during your college years. I wanted so badly to be there when you graduated, to help you move into your first apartment, to meet your friends and hear about your dreams. There were nights when I would sit by my phone for hours, your parents' number pulled up on the screen, my finger hovering over the call button. What stopped you?" I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer. "You did," she said simply. "Every time I was tempted to break cover, I would think about the life you were living, about how normal and happy you seemed in the photos your father shared. I couldn't risk destroying that for my own selfish need to be part of your life." The selflessness of her sacrifice hit me anew. She had chosen my well-being over her own happiness for 15 years. Never knowing if the threat would ever truly pass, never knowing if she would ever be able to reclaim her identity. "The hardest moment," she continued, "was when your father posted about your college graduation. I could see in the photos how happy you were, but I could also see how sad your parents looked. I knew they were thinking about me, wishing I could be there to see you achieve something I had always dreamed about witnessing." She reached into her purse once more and pulled out a small jewelry box. "I bought this for your graduation. I've been carrying it with me ever since, hoping that someday I would be able to give it to you." Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a pendant shaped like a tree. The craftsmanship was beautiful, with tiny leaves that caught the light as it moved. "It's a family tree," she explained. "If your great-grandmother wore it, then I wore it, and I always planned to pass it down to you. Even though I couldn't be there to celebrate with you, I wanted you to have it." I lifted the necklace from the box, feeling the weight of generations in my hands. As Eleanor fastened it around my neck, I felt connected to a history that had been hidden from me for so long. "There's an inscription on the back," she said. "It's been there since your great-grandmother's time." I turned the pendant over and saw tiny engraved words. "Love transcends all distances." The inscription took on new meaning given our circumstances, becoming not just a family motto, but a testament to the truth of our experience. "I want you to know," Eleanor said, "that even though I wasn't physically present for your important moments, I celebrated every single one of them." When your father posted about your first job, I bought myself a cake and made a toast to your success. When he mentioned your first serious relationship, I worried about you like any grandmother would. I may have been Catherine Miller on paper, but in my heart I was always Nana L, loving you from afar. The coffee shop around us had grown quieter as the afternoon wore on, but our conversation felt like it existed in its own bubble of time and space. I looked at this woman who had sacrificed everything for my safety and felt a love that transcended the years of separation. "I'm ready to go home now," Eleanor said. And I understood she meant both returning to my parents and reclaiming her true identity after 15 years of exile. We gathered the documents and letters, each piece of paper a fragment of the story that had shaped all our lives without my knowing. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Eleanor hesitated. "Sarah, there's one more thing I need you to understand before we see your parents. The guilt they've carried about separating us, about lying to you, about the choices they made. It's been destroying them slowly. Your father has aged 20 years in the past 15, and your mother has never been the same since my supposed funeral." I thought about the changes I had noticed in my parents over the years. Subtle shifts in their personalities that I had attributed to normal aging and life stress. Now I understood that they had been carrying the weight of an impossible secret, watching their daughter grieve a grandmother who was actually alive and missing her just as much. "They need to know that you don't blame them," Eleanor continued. "They need to hear from you that you understand why they made the choices they did. Without that forgiveness, bringing me back into their lives might cause more pain than healing." Her concern for my parents, even after everything she had endured, showed me the depth of love that had motivated every decision. This hadn't been a story of family conflict or competing loyalties. It had been a story of people who loved each other so much they were willing to endure unimaginable sacrifices. "I don't blame them," I said. And as the words left my mouth, I realized they were completely true. "I'm angry about the situation, about the criminals who made these choices necessary, about the 15 years we lost. But I don't blame Mom and Dad for doing everything they could to protect me." Eleanor smiled, and for the first time all day, the expression reached her eyes completely. "Then, let's go home." The drive to my parents' house felt both eternal and instantaneous. Eleanor sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, occasionally looking out the window at neighborhoods that had changed during her absence. I caught her staring at new buildings and updated storefronts with the expression of someone returning to a familiar place that had evolved without her. "Are you nervous?" "Haha," I asked as we turned onto my parents' street. "Terrified," she admitted. "Ah, what if they can't forgive me for staying away so long? Ah, what if seeing me brings back all the trauma of that time? Ah, what if they've built a life around my absence and my return disrupts their peace?" Her fears revealed how deeply she had thought about this moment during her years of exile, imagining every possible outcome and worrying about the impact her resurrection might have on the people she loved most. We pulled into the driveway of Quoquay. As we love to tell like Quoque. And we all know I've been exploring that. And we all know I've been exploring that path, imagining every possible outcome, and worrying about Quoque. We love sporing my Quoque up by Quoque. We love with cinch. We love with Siji cod that we love with since. We love. We love with fifth honey for quay cowan. We love with quo we have with third quo quay quoque with quo quay q so way to see cool with for you can we so you see secreted to like dick you with you griffith you with for we act I we are like we are very my childhood home. It's the same modest two-story house where I had grown up believing in a version of my family that was missing a crucial piece. The garden my mother tended looked exactly as I remembered, with the same roses Eleanor had mentioned in her letters, now blooming as my father had coded in his messages. "Their car is here," I observed, noting my father's sedan in the garage. "It's Wednesday," Eleanor said quietly. "Your father always worked from home on Wednesdays so he could post his messages to me during lunch break. He never told your mother about those posts. It was his way of maintaining contact without burdening her with another secret." The layers of deception that had been necessary to maintain their family's safety while keeping Eleanor connected were staggering. I realized that my father had been living with multiple secrets, protecting both his wife and his mother-in-law by compartmentalizing information even within their own family. I rang the doorbell, something I never did when visiting my parents, but which seemed appropriate given the magnitude of what was about to happen. My mother answered, her face lighting up with surprise and pleasure at seeing me unexpectedly. "Sarah, what a nice surprise, honey. I was just thinking about you. ... Her words trailed off as she noticed Eleanor standing behind me. The color drained from her face so quickly, I was afraid she might faint. "Mom," I said gently, "there's someone here who wants to see you." My mother's hands went to her throat, and she began shaking her head slowly, as if refusing to accept what she was seeing. No, this isn't possible. She's dead. We buried her. I threw dirt on her grave." Eleanor stepped forward, tears already streaming down her face. "Hello, Jennifer. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through because of me." The sound of Eleanor's voice saying my mother's name broke whatever control my mother had been maintaining. She collapsed against the doorframe, sobbing with 15 years of suppressed grief and guilt and hope all crashing together at once. "Mom, let's go inside," I said, supporting her weight as she struggled to remain standing. "Dad needs to see this too." We helped my mother to the living room couch, where she sat staring at Eleanor as if she were seeing a ghost. In many ways, she was. "Jennifer, I know this is a shock," Eleanor began, but my mother interrupted her. How are you alive? We saw the body. We planned the funeral. I've been visiting your grave for 15 years. "The body wasn't me," Eleanor explained gently. "It was staged to protect Sarah and all of you. The FBI helped us create the deception, to make the people threatening our family believe I was really dead." My father appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of my mother's sobbing. When he saw Eleanor sitting in our living room, he dropped the coffee mug he had been carrying. It shattered on the hardwood floor, sending ceramic shards and hot liquid across the room, but he didn't seem to notice. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "Hello, David," she said, standing slowly and facing the man who had been her son-in-law, but had treated her like his own mother. "Agent Rodriguez told me it was finally safe to come home." My father crossed the room in 3 quick strides and enveloped Eleanor in a hug that looked like it might never end. He was crying openly, his shoulders shaking with 15 years of suppressed emotion. My mother joined them, and the 3 adults who had made an impossible sacrifice stood in our living room, holding each other and grieving for all the lost time. I watched from a few feet away, finally understanding the full scope of what my family had endured. This wasn't just about protecting me from criminal threats. It was about parents who had chosen to sacrifice their own relationship with a beloved family member rather than uproot their daughter's entire life. "Sarah knows everything," Eleanor said when they finally separated. "I told her about the coded messages about Catherine Miller, about why you had to let everyone believe I was dead." My parents turned to look at me, their faces full of fear and guilt and hope. They were waiting to see if I would blame them for the choices they had made, if learning the truth had destroyed my trust in them. "I'm not angry with you," I said, understanding that they needed to hear this immediately. "I'm angry about the situation, about the people who made these choices necessary. But I'm not angry with you for protecting me." The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. My father sat down heavily in his chair, as if his legs could no longer support the weight he had been carrying. "We wanted to tell you so many times," my mother said, taking Eleanor's hand and holding it as if she might disappear again. "There were nights when I would stand outside your bedroom door, Wanting to explain why I cried every time I looked at family photos, why certain dates were so hard for me. The anniversary of the supposed accident, I said, remembering how my parents always seemed depressed around that date each year. Every year on that date, I would drive to the cemetery and sit by your grave. My father admitted to Eleanor, would talk to an empty headstone and apologize for not being able to bring you home yet. I would tell you about Sarah's achievements and promise that someday, when it was safe, we would be together again. Eleanor covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by the devotion that had sustained our family through 15 years of separation. I knew, she whispered. Somehow, I always knew you were still thinking about me, still loving me, even though you had to pretend I was gone. The afternoon dissolved into evening as we sat together, filling in the gaps that 15 years had created. My parents shared stories about how they had maintained the deception. The close calls when I had asked pointed questions about my grandmother's death. The support they had received from the few people who knew the truth. Agent Rodriguez became like family to us, my mother explained. She would call every few months to update us on the case and to check on how we were coping. She was the only person we could talk to about you, Eleanor, the only person who understood what we were going through. Eleanor told them about her. Life as Catherine Miller, about the small apartment and the part-time job at the bookstore, about the loneliness and the constant fear that she might accidentally reveal something that would endanger us all. She showed them the letters she had written, the photos she had collected, the ways she had tried to stay connected to us from a distance. I kept a calendar, she said, marking every birthday, every holiday, every anniversary. I would celebrate, privately toasting your successes and mourning the moments I was missing. On Sarah's graduation day, I wore my best dress and pretended I was there with you. The depth of love that had sustained our family through this ordeal was staggering. Each person had found ways to maintain connection despite the impossible circumstances, creating invisible threads that had kept us bound together across the years and miles. What happens now? I asked as the sun began to set outside the living room windows. Now we learn how to be a family again, Eleanor said. We figure out how to heal from 15 years of necessary lies and forced separation. My father reached for her hand. I never stopped posting those messages, even when I wasn't sure you were still receiving them. I couldn't bear the thought that you might think we had forgotten you. I never stopped reading them, she replied. They were my lifeline to the family I had to leave behind. My mother stood up suddenly, disappearing into the kitchen. We could hear her moving around, opening cabinets and drawers with purpose. When she returned, she was carrying a photo album I had never seen before. I kept this hidden for 15 years, she said, setting it on the coffee table. Pictures of Eleanor, stories about her, memories I couldn't share with Sarah, but couldn't bear to lose. She opened the album, revealing pages of photographs that documented Eleanor's life before her disappearance. There were pictures of holidays we had celebrated together, family gatherings I barely remembered, moments of connection that had been erased from the official family narrative. I would look through this when the grief became unbearable. My mother continued. It was my way of keeping you alive in my heart while pretending you were dead to the world. As we looked through the hidden album together, I began to understand the full scope of what had been taken from us. These weren't just photographs. They were evidence of relationships and bonds that had been severed by circumstances beyond our control. I saw myself as a young child with Eleanor, both of us laughing in ways that looked completely natural and unguarded. I remember this day, I said, pointing to a picture of Eleanor and me building a sandcastle on a beach. I always thought it was a dream or something I had imagined. You were 4, Eleanor said. You insisted that the sandcastle needed a garden, so we spent an hour decorating it with seaweed and shells. You called it the most beautiful castle in the world. The recovery of these suppressed memories felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that I hadn't even realized were missing. Each photograph unlocked experiences that had been buried under years of believing Eleanor was gone, allowing me to remember the grandmother who had been such an important part of my early childhood. There's something I need to tell you all, my father said, his voice becoming serious, something I've never shared with anyone. We turned to look at him, wondering what other revelations might be coming. After Eleanor's supposed death, I started having dreams about her. Not nightmares, but dreams where she was alive and trying to tell me something important. I would wake up feeling like she was still out there somewhere, still connected to us. Somehow, I never told Jennifer because I didn't want to make her grief worse, but those dreams never stopped. Eleanor stared at him with wonder. David, I had dreams about all of you too. Dreams where I was back in this house, sitting at this table, being part of your daily lives. I would wake up in my apartment in Oregon feeling more homesick than I thought was possible. The idea that they had been connected through dreams, that love had found a way to bridge the distance and deception. Felt like something out of the fairy tales Eleanor used to tell me. But given everything else we had discovered that day, it seemed entirely possible that their bond had transcended the physical separation. I think, my mother said quietly, that some connections are too strong to be completely severed, even by death or distance or necessary lies. As evening deepened into night, we ordered takeout from Eleanor's favorite restaurant, place she remembered from before her disappearance. The simple act of sharing a meal together felt like a miracle, a return to normalcy that we had all thought was impossible. I want to meet Agent Rodriguez, I said as we finished eating. I want to understand everything about the case and what our family's sacrifice accomplished. She wants to meet you too, Eleanor replied. She's been following your life through the updates your father provided, and she's proud of the person you've become. She says that families like ours are rare, that most people couldn't have maintained the deception for 15 years without someone breaking under the pressure. The meeting with Agent Rodriguez took place the following week in her downtown office. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Someone who clearly understood the weight of the secrets she had helped families carry. Your family's cooperation saved lives, she told me without preamble. The organization your father exposed was responsible for money laundering, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and multiple murders. The testimony he provided and the evidence we gathered because of his courage led to convictions that put 12 dangerous people in prison for the rest of their lives. She showed me files detailing the scope of the criminal enterprise, the connections that had reached into legitimate businesses and government agencies, the network of corruption that my father's discovery had helped unravel. The threats against your family were real and immediate, Rodriguez continued. These people had killed witnesses before, and they had detailed plans for eliminating anyone who threatened their operation. Your family's decision to stage Eleanor's death wasn't just creative problem-solving. It was literally life-saving. Knowing that our sacrifice had contributed to justice being served gave new meaning to the 15 years of separation. We hadn't just been victims of circumstances. We've been part of bringing dangerous criminals to justice. What's remarkable, Rodriguez added, is that your family never wavered. 15 years is a long time to maintain a deception, especially one that required ongoing grief and secrecy. Most families would have broken under that pressure, but yours found ways to stay connected while protecting each other. Over the following months, we began the slow process of reintegrating Eleanor into our lives and healing from the trauma of our long separation. She moved back to town, finding an apartment near my parents' house, and slowly began rebuilding relationships with friends and extended family who had believed she was dead. The story we told publicly was that there'd been a mistake with identification. 15 years ago, that Eleanor had been in a coma and had only recently recovered her memory. It wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough to explain her return without compromising the security of others who might still need similar protection. I started therapy to help process the complex emotions surrounding the revelation. Learning that your entire understanding of your family history was based on a necessary lie creates a unique kind of grief. one that involves mourning, not just lost time, but also mourning the innocence of not knowing how dangerous the world could be. Eleanor resumed her place in our family gradually, attending Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, meeting my friends and colleagues, becoming the grandmother she had always been but had been forced to hide. She brought with her 15 years of wisdom gained through isolation and sacrifice, a perspective that made her appreciate every moment of connection. One evening, 6 months after her return, she and I were sitting in her new apartment looking through the letters she had written me over the years. Reading them chronologically was like watching her love persist through the darkest times. Like seeing proof that family bonds can survive any test. "Do you regret it?" I asked her. "The 15 years you gave up for my safety." She looked at me with the same eyes I remembered from childhood, eyes full of love and certainty. "Sarah, watching you grow up safe and happy, seeing the person you've become without trauma shaping your early years, knowing that our sacrifice allowed you to live freely, I would make the same choice again without hesitation." The family tree necklace she had given me caught the light as I leaned forward to hug her. Its engraved message more true than ever. Love transcends all distances. We had learned that love could survive death hoaxes and criminal threats, that it could persist across years and miles, that it could motivate the most extraordinary sacrifices. Today, as I write this story, Eleanor is helping my mother plan a garden that will bloom next spring. They are choosing flowers together, making up for lost time by creating something beautiful that will grow and flourish in the years to come. My father continues to post on that gardening forum, but now his messages are celebrations rather than coded communications, public announcements of joy rather than secret expressions of love. We learned that families are not just created by blood and proximity, but by the choices people make for each other, by the sacrifices they are willing to endure, and by the love that persists even when everything else falls apart. What my family hid from me for 15 years was not just Eleanor's survival, but the extraordinary depth of their commitment to my well-being and to each other. The truth set us free. But it was the lies, the necessary, protective, loving lies, that kept us safe long enough to find our way back to each other.